Imagine waking up tomorrow with exactly the same brain, the same memories, the same fears, the same habits you have been meaning to change. Nothing inside your head has physically changed overnight, and yet, you no longer see yourself as the same person. Something has shifted, not in the neurons, but in what you believe the neurons can do. What happened? The answer is the journey you have already taken. And the question worth asking, as this season comes to a close, is not what you learned. It is what you now see that you couldn't see before. We began with a ceiling, two hands reaching toward each other across the Sistine Chapel, one belonging to God, one to Adam, and between them, a gap, a few centimeters of empty space that Michelangelo refused to close. When we first stood beneath that image together, the gap seemed to represent something simple, the distance between the divine and the human, the moment of creation, the transmission of life. But as we traveled through this season, the gap kept changing meaning. It became the synapse, the microscopic space where one neuron reaches toward another and something invisible passes between them. It became the tip of the tongue moment, the space between what you know and what you can reach. It became the space between the fire commander's unconscious calculation and his conscious command. It became the territory between who you are and what you are learning to do. The gap was never static, and neither were you. Consider what this season actually contained. We met Jill Price, a woman whose memory never released anything, who lived every day of her past at full emotional volume, simultaneously, without relief. And we learned that what most of us experience as forgetting is not a flaw in the system. It is the system protecting us, releasing what no longer needs to be carried at full weight so we can keep moving forward. We discovered that when you forget a name, your brain hasn't lost anything. It has simply lost the path leading to it. And that memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction, rebuilt every time you reach for it, quietly updated by who you are today. We watched a poet survive a catastrophe and discover, in the wreckage, that the brain remembers places long before it remembers words, that the oldest technology for memory was never language, it was architecture. We stood inside Einstein's brain, not in the anatomy, which turned out to be surprisingly ordinary, but in the quality of his attention, in his willingness to stay inside a question for a decade without demanding it resolve itself. We encountered people who woke from brain injuries as musicians, mathematicians, sculptors, not because trauma created new abilities, but because it disrupted the filters that were suppressing existing ones. And we wondered, quietly, how much of every ordinary mind remains unexplored. We entered the state where time stops, and found that it isn't a state of relaxation, but of full engagement. That the self-monitoring voice goes quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because everything that matters is happening. We discovered that the feeling you called a hunch was not a mystery. It was the quiet mathematics of a lifetime, arriving faster than language could follow. And we watched a woman learn a language in 30 days, not because she was exceptional, but because she understood that the brain does not learn what you expose it to. It learns what it has to work to reconstruct. 9 episodes, 9 discoveries about the mind you carry. And now, standing at the end of this first season, a pattern becomes visible that was not visible at the start. Every single one of these stories was about the same thing. Not the brain as a machine, not intelligence as a fixed quantity, not talent as a gift distributed unevenly at birth. Every story was about a brain that was still becoming, a mind that was not finished, a human being whose capacity for change extended far beyond what anyone, including themselves, had initially believed. The human mind is not a completed structure. It is a living architecture, continuously rebuilt by everything it encounters. Modern neuroscience has arrived at an understanding of the brain that would have been considered radical only a generation ago. For most of the 20th century, the dominant model was essentially mechanical. The brain develops, it matures, its structures stabilize, and by adulthood, what you have is largely what you will keep. That model is no longer credible. What the research now shows, across decades of work in neuroplasticity, predictive processing, and learning science, is a far stranger and more hopeful picture. The brain you were born with was not your final brain. The brain you had at 20 was not your final brain. The brain you have today is not your final brain. Every experience you have, every skill you practice, every language you attempt, every question you stay inside long enough to transform, leaves a measurable physical trace in the architecture of the organ that produced it. The white matter thickens, the synapses strengthen, new connections form where none existed. Old ones are pruned, the map is redrawn. This is not motivation, this is biology. Every experience rewrites the mind that had it. But here is where the story becomes more complicated than simple optimism allows. Because neuroplasticity is not a promise. It is a fact about how change works, which means it applies equally to the directions you choose and the ones you don't. Every habit you repeat without examination becomes more automatic. Every story you tell about yourself, "I am not good at this, this is not who I am, this is simply how I am," becomes, through repetition, a prediction the brain begins to fulfill. The biggest limitation most people encounter is not their intelligence. It is not their memory. It is not their capacity to learn or change or grow. It is the story they have been telling about those things for so long that it has begun to function as an instruction. The brain that believes it cannot learn something efficiently has already begun directing its attention away from the evidence that would contradict that belief. The brain that believes it is fixed becomes, over time, more fixed. Not because fixedness is its nature, but because belief shapes attention, attention shapes experience, and experience rewires the brain. The loop is real, and it runs in both directions. You were never finished. You were only practicing. So what is the spark? The title of this episode has been waiting for an answer since the first moment of the series. We have spent 9 episodes circling it, finding it in memory, in genius, in intuition, in flow, in learning, in the revealed abilities of minds that neuroscience once thought were broken. The spark is not consciousness. It is not intelligence. It is not talent. The spark is something more fundamental than any of these. It is the brain's lifelong refusal to stop becoming. The capacity for change that does not diminish with age, the way we were told it would. The neuroplasticity that continues, more slowly in some domains, more rapidly in others, but continues, always, as long as you are alive, and as long as you are still demanding something new of the system. Adaptability is not a secondary human quality. It is the primary one. The thing that allowed the human brain to colonize every climate on the planet, produce mathematics and music and language and art, to rebuild itself after catastrophic injury, to learn new ways of moving through the world in the final decades of a long life. Every other species on Earth is, to a far greater degree than us, the thing it was born as. Humans are the species that becomes. Not by accident, by architecture. The gap was never between what you are and what you could have been. The gap is between what you are and what you are still becoming. Before this season began, you may have understood neuroplasticity as a concept. After 9 episodes, it is something different. It is the foundation beneath every story we told. Why Jill Price suffered while others forgot. Why the fire commander felt before he knew. Why the woman learned a language in 30 days. Why Einstein stayed with wonder longer than everyone else. Why the monks' brains physically changed. Why the person who woke from a brain injury sat down at a piano and played. All of them, in completely different ways, were living in the territory where the brain is still moving, where the fixed gives way to the fluid, where the possible is still larger than the present. Now a question worth carrying into the next season. Everything we have explored together belongs to the part of the mind that can, at least in principle, be observed. Memory, attention, learning, flow, intuition. These are abilities. Things the mind does that can be studied, measured, mapped. But there is another territory, one that shapes every memory you form, every decision you make, every person you become. largely without your knowledge or your consent. The territory beneath awareness, the processing that happens before the signal reaches consciousness, the patterns that were installed before you had language to question them. Season 2 enters a different kind of darkness. Not the darkness of ignorance, the darkness of everything your mind is doing while you are looking elsewhere. The emotions you feel before you know you feel them. The decisions made before you notice you are making them. The fears that live in the body rather than the mind. The invisible architecture of who you believe yourself to be. The question that opens the next season is not what your brain can do. It is who is doing it.
And whether the answer to that question is quite as simple as it has always felt.
Return one final time to the ceiling. 2 hands, reaching across the painted sky. The same gap between the fingertips. The same refusal to close it. When we first stood beneath that image, most of us saw a story about creation, about something being given. But there is another way to look at it. Michelangelo spent 4 years lying on his back, painting that ceiling, not waiting for inspiration to arrive, becoming, day by day, the person capable of producing it. The gap between the fingers was never meant to be closed. It was never meant to represent a completed transmission. It was meant to represent the most important space in the universe, the space between what already is and what is still crossing toward it, between the known and the possible, between who you were when this season began and who you are becoming right now, in this moment, as these final words cross from sound into meaning. The gap between the fingers was never between God and Adam. It was always between the person you were yesterday and the person your brain is already building tonight. The gap never changed. You did. Every neuron remembers. Every thought changes you. Every choice rewrites you. The gap is still there. The spark is still crossing. So become.